So, welcome. This is Spencer. He is from Breakthrough Beverage. My name is Kyle Goodfriend, and I was the person responsible for the implementation of the application at Breakthrough Beverage. And what we're going to walk through today, just as a high-level overview, is from a business perspective, functionally, why some of the decisions were made. So we're going to go through strategically what the finance area needed. And then we're going to go into some of the technology that we use and why we used it. And it's specifically the Groovy Calculation. So in PBCS +1 and ePBCS, you have the ability to use Groovy, which is basically a framework that sits on top of Java, but it's much easier to understand. And it gives you the ability to interact with things like forms and data pushes. You can dynamically generate calculations. And as we get into this, you'll kind of understand why we used it. It started off performance-based, but there are other functions too that are very worth looking into and using. So the second part of this, we'll be talking about functionally how we designed it and how we use Groovy to do things like real-time reporting and stopping forms from saving if an allocation wasn't 100%, or if you picked a person at an hourly rate and then you didn't put in you selected a person as an hourly employee and you didn't put in an hourly rate, it wouldn't let you save the form, to stop things like data being missing from a budget and so on. Real quick, we want this to be very interactive, and at the end of the session, if you want a Starbucks gift card, we'll be handing out some coupons at the back of the room to get yourself a Starbucks gift card. And I don't know if they have Starbucks in this hotel, but I'm sure most of you drink Starbucks, so you can use it at home or whatever. We want this to be very interactive. So I used to teach at a college, and I taught for 5 years. So you guys come here to learn and share knowledge, and so I want this to be interactive. If you have a question, raise your hand, get our attention, and jump in and ask a question. We should have plenty of time to answer all your questions, and I want you guys to leave with more knowledge than you had and some answers to some of the questions you had about Groovy and why we did some of the things that we did. So don't hesitate to jump in and ask a question. Want to go? Yeah. So you can use this or hit the mouse.
So, Breakthrough Beverage, little overview. And like Kyle said, my name is Spencer Craig. I'm a finance manager at Breakthrough Beverage. We're out of Cicero, Illinois, so it's a suburb of Chicago.
Really nice suburb of Chicago.
Yeah. So, like Kyle said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our company and our process, how it's top-down and bottoms-up, and then some of the features, specifically Groovy, that helped us to accomplish that, and then Kyle will get into the nitty-gritty. So we are a leading North American beverage wholesaler. We're the 60th largest private company in the United States, and we're the second largest alcohol distributor in the U.S. We're family-owned and operated. We're in 16 states in the U.S., as well as all of Canada. We have 7,000 employees, and we budget for every single one of them. And we have more than $5 billion in annual sales. To put that in perspective, we distributed 60 million cases of wine last year. And with 250 million adults in the U.S., that's 50 bottles per adult that we distribute, and we're only in 16 states. So very high volume, low margin, which we can tie that in later, but makes Groovy essential for what we do. A little bit about our industry. The alcohol industry is highly regulated. From Prohibition, a 3-tier system came about where you have a distributor in the middle between a supplier and a retailer. It's mostly just a way for the government to collect taxes, but the 21st Amendment in 1933 put that on the states to actually come up with the specifics. So another piece of our budget is that every single state has a very different way of budgeting. And we have, I think, 68 offices throughout the country, so pretty dispersed, making this tool essential for us. Some of the alcohol we distribute, and I'm sure you guys drink, We have Kettle One, Jack Daniels, Tullamore Dews, Tito's, and Crown Royal. Like I was saying, everything's very state specific, so we could sell one in one state but not in another, making it even more complicated for us in budgeting. We also sell beer and wine. Some brands you might know are Dogfish Head for beer, Jackson Family Estates, Barefoot and Avant for wine. We have 70,000 SKUs that we group to brand families, so we'll talk about that a little bit, but we have 17,000 members in our vendor dimension, so that's where some of the Groovy calculations come in handy. So why we chose ePBCS. I voted for them because they brought the best lunch to our demo, but that is just me. No, totally kidding. They didn't bring lunch. I was pissed. We went through a formal RFI process. We had 3 vendors come in. It's very official. I didn't even know that our company has a whole department just for procuring software. So went through that process. Some of the key reasons that Oracle stood out to us. The first 2 are really just stock answers that you could probably apply to any vendor. They're a leader in their field, provide efficient and centralized data, but where we saw Oracle stand out a bit was handling significant amounts of data. And like I said, we have a lot of variations, and ability to scale and ease of use being finance owned. So we are an industry that's consolidating, and we're about to double in size in the next 6 months. So we need to have the ability to scale the product, and we want finance to be able to control that instead of IT. So this is completely finance owned.
I'm a little disappointed that you guys didn't bring like little bottles or something to distribute to everybody.
I thought you were doing it.
On the plane, probably.
Yeah, I did bring them. They're just not here anymore. So it's sort of the vision of our old process and the new process that we wanted, and Oracle fulfilled most of these, specifically once we got Groovy involved. And just for some perspective, we started our project, and I don't think Groovy even came out, or it was brand new. So we didn't even know that we were going to have some of these features, but we still thought we were going to have real-time reporting and things like that. So it really fulfilled some of those needs that we had. So we had 2 separate processes for legacy companies. Like I said, we're consolidating a lot, so every state's budgeting differently, and we needed to get everybody on one system. Decentralized and consistent views of data. Like I said, every state's different, laws are different, so it's a good way to get everybody on one system, but still allow them at lower levels to budget how they want and tailor it to their own needs. We had manual Excel templates, which I'm sure everybody else did. So it's great to have driver-based processes, validation, smart view for variation analysis, things like that. Level of detail captured, I already talked about that, but we eventually do a bottoms-up, zero-based budget. So we put in a ton of detail, and again, Groovy was essential for that. Groovy also got us real-time reporting, so we didn't have consolidated visibility into our budget. Now we can enter something into our GP cube and immediately see it in our full P&L roll-up in our fin cube during the budgeting process, which was an expectation of ours, and Groovy helped us accomplish. So we have the bottoms-up, top-down budget. We have a national finance team that does our top-down budget, and then we have all of the states do their bottoms-up budget. This tool has given us control at a national level to be able to see what people are doing, why they're doing it, and push down assumptions and things like that to lower levels. So that's been a big help, and that's mostly because of Groovy. And version control. We always had problems with version control. I'm sure other people have as well, especially if you're in Excel. But in Oracle, it's really easy, allows us to have a lot of back and forth with the top-down and bottoms-up budget and come through with 3 or 4 or 5 versions. So a little overview of our budgeting process. Like I said, and like the title says, we have a top-down and bottoms-up budget. At the end of the day, we have our local markets create a budget from the bottoms up without any input from the national finance team and vice versa. So our national finance team puts together a high-level budget based on year-over-year trends. We strip out one-time expenses, come to a normalized P&L, come up with a bunch of scenarios based on gross profit, changes, organic revenue objectives, expense cuts, things like that. We present that to the executives. They decide on one that makes sense to them, and that's our top-down budget that we come to the table with. Bottoms-up budget, every state does a budget by employee. So we have 7,000 employees. A lot of the Groovy functionality that we have makes it possible to have that much detail. We actually upload all of our employees first, and then everybody can go in and make tweaks. And we have a lot of assumptions, assumption logic in our workforce planning cube. So at a high level, we can put in a global increase in pension date or a global increase in benefits date and have that flow down, but then also have it at a lower level. Employees make changes at the states, and we have visibility to it.
One of the things that was kind of unique about their workforce application is they allocate people across cost centers and material group.
Cost centers and states, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So they might have a driver that distributes, 5 different brands in 3 different states. And so they literally go in and they will allocate that person, from a ratio perspective, 20%, 30%, 50% based on the product and the state that they actually do it in. So it's the first time I've ever done anything where they allocated a person across multiple areas. So it was kind of interesting.
And we haven't done this yet, but with the validation piece of Groovy, we're hoping to get to a point where if we go across 3 cost centers or 3 states where we can have validation saying whether we're at 100% or not. We had a big issue our first time around where people thought that they were allocating 100% and they weren't, and there's just too much data to go through one by one. So another applicable way to use Groovy. So then after we have our top-down and bottoms-up budget, we have a reconciliation process, which I thought it was funny to put this picture up, but I didn't see a single laugh. So yeah, we go back and forth with the executives, make sure we hit their earnings targets and all that. And then we have what we call a challenge and build process with our sales teams where we come back with what the executives want, give them targets, and do a back and forth process, which is why we end up with so many versions. So quick overview of our application. I think it's pretty standard, but we have 3 cubes: workforce planning, GP, and then our fin cube, which is our consolidated P&L. Some things to mention. We have this SQL restatement up here. I didn't realize this was unique, but we actually are using data management to upload metadata, 17,000 members or so a night, and that's been going really smoothly, so just something that we have and are happy with. We also have multiple feeds going into our system daily from Microsoft AX as well as SAP. So from an actuals perspective, we have frequent data, not real time. But again, because of Groovy, we can have real-time budget data to compare it to.
And one of the things to kind of point out, if you guys have had this issue, you'll need to understand when we get into the real-time reporting, is the fact that they have different dimensions in the different applications, which is something you guys all have. But we basically have gotten around consolidating anything and still getting real-time results, which we'll get into in a little bit.
So some of the features of our application, like I said, this actually should be brand family level detail, but we have 17,000 members or so that we're going down to, so that is a challenge for us and something we got through, so worth noting. Do people do seating, or is that kind of specific to us?
No, there's a lot of people that see.
Okay. All right. So we have a lot of seating logic that we use for our vendors just because of the level of detail, and that's turned out to be a huge time saver for us. We can see data on trend, prior year forecast, but that's been huge for us, so worth noting. We have a reset vendor functionality, which is great. So when we see data, we put all of our data into a base source, so we always have that original data to go back to. So people can go in during our challenge and build process. They can do a lot of scenarios, look at how they think things are going to turn out, and if they get a little carried away, you can just right-click at the top level, reset, and then all of those brand families, you could have hundreds or thousands below it, will reset back to the original seating options.
It's kind of like an undo.
Yeah, but it's big though.
A big undo.
It's big for us. We couldn't do that with our last tool, so that was some key functionality for us. So workforce planning, like I said, we budget at the employee level. We have over 7,000 employees and 15 or so accounts that we budget for, but each one of those accounts, or most of those accounts, have increased assumption dates and things like that. So Groovy has, I'm pretty sure, made it possible for us to even do that. Between the allocations we talked about and increased months and things like that, Groovy goes through, comes up with our calculations. Everybody's been pretty thrilled with that. Like we've said, we allocate across multiple employees. We have a lot of global assumptions, so during the top-down piece of our budgeting process, we're given assumptions that we can just plug in, and those will feed down, so we don't have to stop anybody from doing their budgets at lower levels. They can keep doing their bottoms-up budget, and then we put in our assumptions, and they feed down, and everything recalculates. I think Kyle's going to actually show an example maybe of the data validation hourly salary. That's a good one. Because we have 7,000 employees, the audit process is pretty much impossible to go through and make sure everybody who chose an hourly employee put in a salary that's appropriate. So that's going to save us a ton of time and let us get the level of detail that we want. Kyle's going to talk about the real-time reporting that we have in our FinCube. And then something else that we used Groovy for is push-down functionality for our forecasting templates. So we have a template where you can go in and you can either, at any level of our hierarchy for cost center or company, you can go in, enter an increase or decrease in the out months, either manually, and those will push down to the lower levels as a percentage of the total, or you can just add increases to the beginning, so 10% increase for the remainder of the year, and it'll squeeze the out months to get you that 10% year over year. So those are big functionalities for us, and helps us with the top-down piece of our budget, because it's not really realistic to go in and change 1,000 employees in your region based on a small tweak or something like that. So project overview. We had 2 full-time consultants, Kyle and one other person on site, 1 part-time employee that was working on our project occasionally, but internally, I was the only full-time person working with them. We had a director, 2 VPs who helped out, an IT project manager, and an ERP and BI analyst who we were able to reach out to, but we didn't realize the resources internally that we would need, so I just wanted to throw this up here and call that out a little bit as a warning if people don't have ePBCS yet. So some of the Groovy specific wins, real-time reporting, we talked about, pre-save input validation, we talked about the dynamic calculations on large forms, which Kyle will walk through. One example is for our GP logic. We can enter what we want our GP3 rate to be, or a range that we want our GP3 level 3 to come out to, and that will actually push back, change our COGS and revenue to get us to where we want based on case volume that we've already entered and prices per case, things like that. So global assumptions I talked about, allocations, seating, drivers and spreads we talked about. Some of the lessons we took away from our project, just in case people haven't gotten here yet. End user input throughout the project. We did not start that early enough, and it was difficult to get people to buy in. So that was definitely something we came away with. A lot easier for user adoption. We eventually got there, but wish we had included people earlier. As a finance person, I didn't even know what UAT testing was until we got into this. But definitely keep that in mind. It's critical. Phasing out the project. So we actually implemented this in about 6 months, so pretty quickly for us and how many people we had working on it. We've found a lot of things that we wanted to change since we implemented the system. So we don't have a phase 2 plan, but we're looking to do something like that. We wish we had planned that just so we could come up with the kinks and then work through them in phase 2. Realistic expectations, must have internal IT support, sourcing data. So it took us longer to actually get the data into our system, or data that we could upload into our system, than it took us to put the system together. We wish we had started that before we even got to development.
That's something for anybody that's a consultant, they know this because we live it every time we go somewhere. But every time I go to a client, they always say, "Oh, the data's good. That's the last thing you need to worry about. We can get the data. It's clean. It's good." And I can tell you that I've never been anywhere where we've gotten data on time and where it's been accurate. So it's just something, if you guys are looking at doing something like that, your data will not be quick and it will not be right as the first time you try to get it. So.
And I don't know about anybody else, but our expectations when we purchased this tool were everything was going to be real time. The cloud's going to solve all of our problems and cook us dinner and everything, but didn't do that. So while we have real time now because of Groovy on the budget side, we're still a little slower on our actuals, and we're working through that. Internal dedicated resources, testing and training. Mike, who works for us, is right here. He put together a repository of training materials. We had wished we did that throughout the project. We were implementing it and not waited till the end. We are creating a super user group so that we could get better testing as we are making changes to the system. So when we get our phase 2, we can essentially have a group of testers ready at any time. And one other thing, our bugs that we're seeing with Groovy, as a warning, it's new technology. There's some things that don't work 100% yet, and we're working through the SRs, which everybody knows how working through SRs are. Keep those expectations in mind, and there's definitely some workarounds and extra work we do to get there, but again, Groovy's been great, but keep your expectations in line. Say it again?
What are the bugs? Yeah.
Oh, what do we got? You can't run, so there's a lot of functionality that will work in the web that won't work in SmartView. The reason why is on the web, the calculations can use hidden fields, but once you get into SmartView, if you have fields hidden, the Groovy calculations can't use those. So we have some forms that we do all of our budgeting in Excel, but then we have like 1 or 2 forms we have to tell people to go to the web to use. And that, telling 70 users to do that, it's a simple thing for people who know it, but that was a nightmare. So little things like that can,
well, I guess it depends how you define major. There were probably 2 or 3 that have been fixed. The other big one is the validation. I mean, if you're using the UI and you're using the web, you're fine. Everything works great. The other one that we have is on the validation, and this is kind of an odd one, and I'm hoping that it'll be corrected relatively soon. So it's a simple thing, but it impacts everything you do validation on, so you almost can't do validation in Excel right now. So if you have, let's say you have, 12 months, and you update all 12 months, and one cell isn't valid because it's too high, it's above a threshold or whatever. So the form won't save, none of the data gets submitted for those 12 months that you changed, and then the one cell that broke, basically, turns red, or whatever color you want, and it tells you that you have to fix that before you can submit it. So let's say, I don't know, I put in a 1 on all 12 months except for the first one, and that was a 50, and the highest it can be is a 1. They would show as 1s, and then the 50 would be red, so I changed the 50 to a 1, and then submit it, but the only one that gets submitted is the one that was invalid. So basically when you submit the form and you stop it from saving the data, SmartView thinks that everything is clean, it's not dirty anymore, so the cells aren't edited, so that when you submit it the second time, all the ones that you think are edited aren't edited and they don't get submitted. And right now I don't really have a workaround because, I mean, with the Groovy I can change the number behind the scenes, so I can say make it a 0, and it still doesn't change SmartView's identification that it needs to be submitted, because I tried to change it to 0 and then back to what it was to make it dirty, and I can't find a workaround right now for it.
So I'm gonna pass it over to Kyle, because I think you came to learn about Groovy and not listen to me ramble.
Does anybody have any questions so far on the process and anything that they learned, they do differently?
What was some of the users' feedback when they first started testing or on the UAT?
So we had a variety of people who didn't even know how to use the tool, and then we had a variety of people who came from other places, so they did know how to use the tool, that were further along than we thought people would be at. A lot of their feedback was we wish that we were further along before we had the UAT testing, because a lot of it was just us explaining what some of the issues were and workarounds. So I think we would have definitely had that a little bit more smoothed out. That was some feedback we got.
What about likes, dislikes
Of the tool.
yeah.
So a lot of so we had 2 companies that merged. One company was using Excel, so to them, they thought we were, gods for bringing this tool to them. And then we had some people who were using BI360 before, who were pretty skeptical, because right off the bat, I think this tool is way better than BI360, but it's tough to show somebody during testing, how that's going to look for them. So depended on who it was, but the feedback was, overall, it was good. I just think we could have managed how we presented it to people better, because expectations are everything, and we missed that a little bit.
Big.
With the issues that you are finding with Groovy and SmartView, would you recommend if you start with not using this, or using Groovy to wait until those bugs are kind of cleared up, like implement
I would not recommend that you wait. I would recommend that you use it, because 95% of it is going to change your life. And the validation is awesome. If it doesn't work, I'd probably maybe stay away from the validation right now. And I'll get into why, but the rest of it is game changing. It's crazy good.
And we have multi-currencies, so right now we don't have, that's not somewhere we're having issues with the real-time pushes. So all of our GP data is 100%, about to be moved over to production, but 100% moving in real time. And yeah, like Kyle's saying, that was game changing. So I would definitely work on something like that, and then maybe, see if it's enough of a priority validation and things like that.
Go ahead.
Push planning, did you have it by name or was it by position? Just out of curiosity, with 7,000 individuals.
By name, and then everybody has a position assigned to them, and we have logic. Another place Groovy helped us. We have logic where we're actually, depending on the title or position, it might flow to a different account. So we have some salary salespeople who we want their salaries going straight to commission, and then we want some going straight to salary. So we actually have logic based on position that helps us move that around, but we're down to the person by name. Yeah.
Anybody else else before we get into the demo?
Cool.
So I'm hoping I'm still connected. So I'm going to go through kind of the process that Breakthrough goes through when they're doing their budget. So not the seeding, that is a little bit more lengthy process, but a user's going to go in, and correct me where I'm wrong, a user's going to go into the GP overrides form. And I'll preface by saying that this actually is different than the production application. So the data in here is different. I overrode the products with outdoor living type products. So you're not going to see, Jack Daniels and things like that. But what we're doing here is this application is actually twice as large as the Breakthrough because I've actually got Best Buy's data in here as well that I downloaded from their website. So it's from a performance perspective, don't think that this is such a small set of data. It's actually twice as big.
And we have a lot better product than Best Buy, but
Yeah. So what Spencer was talking about is this is the form that they can go in and they can override at upper levels and push it down. So we have indicators over here to the right, which this is Groovy, and it gives you a lot of flexibility that works. So you can do traffic lighting, and you can do traffic lighting with validation, but with Groovy, you've got 16 billion colors you can use. You can, like I said, it's up to your imagination. Whatever you guys want to do with validation can be done in a form. So you have much more control over the traffic lighting. But a user's going to come in here, and so the case growth right now is 60, and the units are 152. So I'm going to make this 68, and I want to, the growth rate, I'm going to change the growth rate to 20%, and I'm going to change the case to 68. So before we started using Groovy, this form took, I don't know that I remember, but it maybe 5 minutes to save. And the issue is, excuse me, up here you can pick a parent material group and a parent channel. So there might be hundreds of thousands of intersections that are actually getting impacted. And when you're doing it at a parent level, this stuff all gets allocated down. So there were not just a push down, but there were also, I guess, algorithms in there to adjust data by month so that certain things didn't change that they didn't want impacted. So what we have done is when you make a change here and you hit save, and this will take a little bit longer than what it actually really takes because the form's refreshing. But basically what we have done, and I should have saved this before we started so it was quicker, but basically what we have done here is we changed one line. That one line was identified. So everything that we did, the calculation, the currency, the push to the reporting cube, the consolidation to the financial model, the P&L, is done now. So we have identified the one product, so we customized the calculation. Instead of doing I descendants or at relative, we actually fix on that one specific product because we only changed one product. The data push, one product gets pushed. If you only change 2 months, you can only push those 2 months. So you have complete control over the amount of data that you're actually calculating. So if I went and changed 30,000 products and hit save, it's going to take the same amount of time as if I did or at relative. I mean, it's not magic. It's not making the calculation engine faster, but it's isolating the data so specifically to what's been changed that we have the ability to make it appear way faster. That's Groovy. Yeah, so basically what happens here is when we hit save, it iterates through the cells and it says, is it dirty or not? Has it been changed or not? And this row is changed, so I just hold that vendor and it loops through all the cells and it says I changed 3 vendors. So my fixed statement is now 3 vendors. My smart push is 3 vendors instead of at relative, right? The other thing that is, this is the one that is, I mean, this is good. I mean, this is improvements. But the thing that we have done here is I change one product. I can go to the fin cube, which doesn't have vendor, it doesn't have material group, and it doesn't have channel, and I can see the impact of that. So whereas in the past you would have to consolidate the BSO cube and do a data push or an XWrite or an XREF, or, well, you wouldn't have been able to do XREF, but that process is completely eliminated. So Groovy didn't make the consolidation any faster, it just eliminated the need for it. So, and I can prove this, so if I go in and change, I'm just gonna change a couple to some exorbitant growth rate so that I see a change. And if I save this, so that was pretty quick, and actually the majority of that time was actually refreshing the form. It wasn't actually doing the calculation. So if I go over to Excel, and I've got 4 tabs here. So the first tab is the gross profit. It's the ASO cube for the gross profit. So when I made this change, it pushed it to the reporting cube. So if I refresh this, I see data change. If I go over to the validation sheet, I see variances, okay? So one, we know that the data's changed in RGP. If I go to the fin, which is the BSO cube that doesn't have those dimensions, and I refresh that, I get the updates. If I go to RFin and refresh that, I get the updates and everything ties out. So, I mean, this is, to me, this is so stupid good. It's incredible because I just changed a database at 3 dimensions that another database didn't have. It consolidated the entire dimension. So vendor, material group, and channel were theoretically consolidated and pushed over to the reporting cube, to the P&L cube. So if I go and change a person from union to non-union and hit save, I go over to the P&L cube and the impact is there. Ah, come on, that's awesome.
I mean, say in close, I had 15 requests a day for people to push data, like they gotta wait for the whole nightly process to run, and nobody wants that. This sucks. Great.
So, yes, sir.
So that's all in control for me of like calculating out the three cells, smart pushing and pushing across with the cells only to reflect all these.
Correct. So I'll get to a slide in a second that'll map it out that I think will answer that question. Let me just do a couple more things, and I'll show you some of the validation that happens. And again, the validation doesn't work quite as cleanly in Excel yet. But on the, so basically when the users go in, they adjust at a high level those percentages. Then they go into the phasing form, which goes down to a bottom level. And if you'll notice over here, so all my products are going down the rows, and if you look over here, I've got all the units that are currently there. So the first form generated those units all the way down at a base level. So if I want to go in and change some of this and shift this around, maybe I had a product that I grew by 80% because I only had 3 months in the prior year. So it really wasn't a full year of data, so I adjusted it. But because of the way the allocations work, I'm only going to have all that data in the 3 months, as an example. So they go into this form, and then they can phase or spread those months so that the monthly numbers are now correct. So a couple things. I'm going to change this third line, and if you'll notice, I'm going to pick a different line. All right, I'm going to pick this one that has a 233. So if I go over, and they don't want the user to ever be able to change the number of units for the year. So if I increase 1 by 10, I got to reduce something else by 10. So if I add 10 to this cell and I remove 8 from this cell and I try to save this, it's going to come back and it's going to say that you can't do that. And it blocks those cells, it tags them in the color that you want, And if you put your cursor over it, you have a tooltip that tells you exactly why. And this says, the cell has been modified. Adjustments must not have a full year impact. So the data currently has a total impact of 2, which would be the 10 minus the 8. So they want it to be 0. So I can go in and change these, and I can change this to 10 and save the form. Both of those numbers now get saved back to the database. So the beauty of this is before you had to do the validation post-save. So if somebody saved the data, you can come back with that return and say, hey, you shouldn't have done that. And you could wipe out what they did, but you really couldn't stop them from doing it. So this allows you to control so much more, and it seems like a simple thing, but if you guys that work in finance and work on the consolidation side, you know how awful it is to go in and validate this stuff and then go after people that enter the wrong data, and it's a nightmare. You miss budgets are wrong, there's all kinds of things that happen. The other thing that we have in here is, so I have 243 in January. If I want to remove 500 and then add 500 to the next month, and I try to save this, it'll also stop me because it says your impact on January is going to reduce January to a negative case volume, and you can't sell negative cases. Now, real world, there are adjustments and things, but as an example, those are the types of things you can do. So think about allocations. If somebody doesn't allocate something fully, and try again. All those things you can do now with this Groovy stuff. So it's really, like I said, it's twofold. The performance is crazy, what you can do, and then the interface with the user, or the interaction with the user is, you just have so much potential now to help the people, either yourself or the people that are using this, to improve their budgets and not have problems and not have to work until 2 in the morning because they got to figure out what they screwed up. So it's crazy. This stuff is, I'm so impressed and so glad that they, released this so that we can use it. And then, I should have done this first, but one of the great things, yeah.
Sorry, one other question. I know like in the older on-prem versions, like they had validation for
Mhm.
the client-side code and like the ADFs.
Mm-hmm.
It performed pretty slowly on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
This is all Groovy. Is it doing
It's-
client-side or
It's,
faster?
it is faster. No, it's not. I don't think it's doing it on the client side because you submit it and then the Groovy gets executed and returns. But one of the great things, I've worked at some unique places. Abercrombie & Fitch was one of them. That place was crazy. This place, I've never been anywhere where you walk into the cafeteria and they don't have recycling bins for bottles and cans, but they have recycling bins for corks. And they have plastic shot glasses beside the fridge so you can try the product. So, very, very cool place to work. Check on the time. So, functionally I walk through some of these and I can go through some more if we don't have questions, and I can give some other examples, but we talked about the different things. So the speed at which you can move data around, also the real-time feedback to the user when they make an error. I mean, you're never gonna make them make their budget correct, right? That's impossible, but you can stop a lot of errors and make it more correct and more accurate and save them a lot of time. So your question, which we'll get into, basically the difference, if nobody's ever used this, the difference is that when you go into a calculation, there's a couple different steps you need to take, and the first one is you change the view to the edit view, and then you're gonna get a drop down over on the right to change it from calc script to Groovy script, and then bam, you have a Groovy script that you can work with. We've already talked about a lot of these things, the proactive user input validation, the selective data syncs and business logic, and access to Java functions. So things that are kind of slow on the S-based side, like when you're getting like a substring or you're trying to take a member name and convert it to a string, a lot of those things you can actually do on the Groovy and then pass it to the calculation, and it's faster. The real-time consolidation is incredible. Think about this. We're working with a client right now that we're completely bypassing BSO. Think about that. S-based calculations are gone. So it sits on top of the ASO cube. All the business logic, the currency conversion, the rate volume, I mean, all that stuff is done in Groovy. And it sends it to you submit the form on an ASO database, and bam, there isn't even any data pushes. The custom user errors, if they have a runtime prompt, you can, let's say if you want to restrict them from entering in special characters, you can do that on a runtime prompt. So you can return it and say, you can't play. I don't want an @ sign or a hashtag. You got to have letters and numbers. The custom logging, yep.
The first point, in this implementation, you're using ASO with Groovy, or is it pointing without it?
In their application, we're not. I have some examples in here where I've replicated it, that I'm actually doing a session later today and then another one tomorrow specifically on the grid builder in Groovy that I'm going to talk to that about. The custom logging, you can write whatever you want to the log, so you can manage times. You know how fast the calculations are taking. You know how many cells were submitted in the reporting or in the data maps. For those of you who work with strategic modeling, the Groovy can go back and forth. So I'm not an HSF or a strategic modeling guy. I've never really implemented it, but we do have clients that we're working right now where when they enter data in the plan or in HSF, it just automatically syncs and pushes it back and forth, runs the calculations in HSF, pushes it to planning for long-term planning and so on. Just to give you an example, so the form that I actually showed you, these are real-time results at breakthrough. And if you think about the @descendants on the calculation, it was taking 26 seconds for a lower level calculation. With Groovy, it takes under a second. The smart push went from 14.5 seconds to 1 second. The consolidation went from 83 seconds if you would run that on the form to 0.2 seconds, because theoretically the consolidations don't exist anymore.
I don't know what Kyle was going to do if Groovy didn't come out, because that wouldn't have been okay.
Yeah. I would have blamed Oracle. So on the consolidation side, you can also create the Groovy calculations to do mass calculations as well, not just on a form. So example, the global consolidation, when we had to consolidate BSO and push it over, was taking 663 seconds, which is 11 minutes. It takes 12 now. Because again, those consolidations are gone. We basically loop through the companies, and then we spit the data from the ASO cube at consolidated levels to the consolidated cubes. We've kind of talked about this. So, to answer the question over here is basically when the calculations run now, I have an S-based calculation in the script, but I have parameters in the fixed statements. So those parameters are built when the person saves the form, and then I loop through all the cells. So before, this area up here, I was doing all months and all rows, right? Now, I'm only doing the months that change, and I'm only doing the rows that change. So when you think about the volume of data, again, if you did the same volume of data, this isn't going to make a whole lot of difference. But how often does somebody come in and change every person or every product in the form, right? So that's the benefit of this. And again, those views, those consolidated data points are used everywhere. They're used in the S-based calculations. They're used in the data maps, everywhere. This is an example of the log. So what's in the log is exactly what I want to be in the log. There's nothing that goes there. By default. So if you run this, nothing happened. It's blank. So I have statements in there to tell me how long it took to do the data push, how long it took to do the S-based calc. And in this example, you've got 1.5 seconds to do the S-based calculation, and it was 2.2 seconds to do the data copy. So if the form seems like it took 5 seconds to return, it was just the UI refreshing. But you can do whatever you want in this. I've pushed out the point of view. You can push out the username that did it, how many cells they changed. It's almost limitless. So, you know, it was something I was gonna ask. I haven't found a way to do that, but is there a way, do you guys know if there's a way to do that? Okay. I haven't tried it, but it's something I've thought about. I won't even get into it. We walked through these examples, so I'm not gonna reiterate them. All right, I don't have the slide in, actually the slide's further back. I think, didn't we have that slide that had the little grids and the data movement? Yeah, here we go. So basically, to answer your question on what we're really doing, so when somebody saves something in the GP model, it saves to the BSO cube, the calculation runs, it does the allocation. Then it pushes it to the GP reporting cube, the ASO cube, which is this piece right here, okay? And then from there, we're using the grid builder and Groovy to move the data at a consolidated level from the GP model to the fin model that has the lesser dimensions. So think about it this way. You change company one, you create a smart view, and you retrieve the accounts that you want, but you do it at total channel, total vendor, total material group, you know, total whatever the ones that aren't in the fin cube, and you have your grid and you refresh it and you've got your totals, right? And it comes back sub-second. Then you create another tab in Smart View that's connected to your fin cube, right? And it doesn't have some of those dimensions, and it might go to a different data source, input, or you know, whatever. And then you copy the data. I'm literally like you select the range, you copy it, you paste it into tab 2, and you hit submit. That's theoretically what we're doing now. So we have the data in the GPBSO. We dynamically push that to the ASO cube, which now you can retrieve to get consolidated data. Then we retrieve it from the consolidated ASO, or the ASO cube at total levels. We push it to the fin cube, both BSO and ASO, and submit it. So that's how you get around those consolidations. And it's sub-second. It's really quick. It's faster than what you see when you retrieve a Smart View, because there's no overhead, I think, because there's no overhead in the Excel side. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. So there's nothing on the roadmap right now to make that available, and quite honestly, I think it's a price point. They want you to pay for it. It is available in PBCS +1, which I didn't even know existed and didn't know what that was until I got into this. But PBCS +1 is 2 pods or a pod and just workforce. So if you wanted it, you could buy another pod, and it's not as, I think it's like right in the middle of PBCS and ePBCS, the price point. So if you had 10 users, you might want to buy another pod for more development, more work, whatever, or a module, just to get Groovy. If you had 1,000 users, that's gonna be a lot. That's a decision that I can't make whether it would be a good call or not. But for breakthroughs, experience, I mean, without this, and I'm glad that they had ePBCS, because without this project would have failed. It would never have met their expectations.
How many users?
70. But everybody wants a license now. Starting at work, thinking about what we're gonna do. Probably gonna end up getting another 40 or so.
Sorry, did I catch that Groovy doesn't function in BBCS unless you have the workforce module?
It doesn't, it's not available in yes, it's not available in PBCS. They won't, it's not turned on. It's there, it's just not turned on. So whether it's workforce or CapEx or projects or the financial, any of the modules, if you just bought one module, then you would have it. So not just workforce. Yep.
So then, go back to that first example that you showed. Do you enter values at the base level there, or did you allocate?
No, that was at a consolidated level.
Yeah, and allocated it down in the BSO and then transferred it over to the ASO?
Correct. it's a percent the total, the way we did it, so,
That percentage is not something that you have already entered, or something that the system is generating?
so it's something that's already entered. So if you go at a parent and you say, I want to grow at 20% at that parent level, it calculates the results, and then it does, at a percent the total, it pushes each one down, each account down. So like revenue, if you grew 20%, you'd multiply revenue at total by 20%, and you'd have a new number. I mean, effectively, everyone changes by 20%, you know?
And we, in work, or in that forecast form I was talking about, we can do that where it'll put down accounts and cost centers. So that was big for us, not just going down one way, but you can dynamically spread
I
that.
think there's about, you're talking about 17,000 SKUs or something?
17,000 dimensions in our vendor,
Members.
or members.
It's not their SKUs, we have way more SKUs, so like, it's like a,
17,000.
We have 70,000 SKUs because we group that into brand families. So Jack Daniel's, Fire, Jack Daniel's, to me is a brand family.
so a SKU would be like a,
To the SKU level?
Down to the brand family level.
we don't have SKU in it. The SKU would be like the different size bottles, you know?
Yeah, we don't want to budget for SKU, so yeah, that's the only reason we're at the brand family level.
So we were at 12:45. I think we have lunch. I have nothing to do until the next time I do this at 3 or something like that. So I'll stick around, and I'm going to volunteer Spencer to stick around. If you have any questions that you didn't feel comfortable talking to us about in front of the crowd, you're more than welcome to, come up and ask us. And make sure you get a card on the way out and get your free $5, I think it's $5, the gift card for Starbucks. So thanks, guys, for participating. I really appreciate you being here.